her town, and the very ground beneath her feet. Maya had been tracking a wounded doe through the high country, following a trail of blood that shouldn't have been there, not this far up the mountain where hunters rarely ventured. The blood drops were dark against the fallen leaves, each one a small tragedy that pulled her deeper into the forest, farther from the gravel road where her truck sat waiting. She wasn't a hunter herself. Maya fixed things, engines, transmissions, the occasional broken heart over beer at Murphy's Tavern. She ran Reyes Auto Repair in Pinewood, her father's legacy, but on her days off, she climbed. She let the mountains breathe life back into her lungs after too many hours under hoods. The doe's trail led her off the established path, through dense stands of lodgepole pine where the afternoon light fell in golden shafts through the branches. Maya's boots crunched on pine needles and scattered twigs. Her breath came in steady clouds in the cooling air. She wore a faded flannel shirt over a thermal, jeans worn soft from 1,000 days of work, and a canvas jacket that had belonged to her father. In her backpack, she carried water, a first aid kit, and a worn paperback she'd been reading on lunch breaks. A thriller about corporate espionage that now seemed almost absurd in the profound silence of the wilderness. The blood trail stopped abruptly at a rockfall. Maya stood there for a long moment, studying the tumbled boulders and the way they'd settled against the mountainside like dice thrown by an indifferent god. The doe was nowhere to be seen. No body, no tracks leading away, just the blood trail ending at a wall of stone and shadow. It didn't make sense. Animals didn't just vanish. They left signs: disturbed earth, broken branches, the faint musk of fear and pain. But here, there was nothing except the whisper of wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling somewhere above the treeline. She was about to turn back when she noticed it. A gap, not large, maybe 3 feet wide, between two massive boulders that had fallen in such a way that they created a narrow opening into the mountain itself. The kind of space that would be invisible from any other angle, hidden in shadow and easily overlooked. Maya knelt down, peering into the darkness beyond. Cool air breathed out from the gap, carrying with it a smell that was wrong somehow. Not the earthy scent of caves or the mineral tang of stone. Something else. Something metallic and stale and almost artificial. Her mechanic's instinct kicked in. That same curiosity that made her take apart engines just to understand how they worked. That same need to solve puzzles and find answers where others saw only chaos. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing not rough cave walls, but something that made her heart skip a beat. Concrete. Smooth, poured concrete with a slight curve to it, like the interior of a massive pipe or tunnel. And there, just visible in the phone's light, was a seam. A manufactured edge. Human construction, here in the wilderness where no construction should exist. Maya's hands were trembling as she squeezed through the gap. It was tight. Her shoulders scraped against the rock on both sides. But she made it through, emerging into a space that defied everything she thought she knew about this mountain. She stood in what appeared to be a concrete antechamber, maybe 10 feet across, with walls that rose up into darkness above her. The air was cool and still, untouched by wind or weather. Her phone's light revealed a heavy steel door set into the far wall, its surface matte gray and marked with faded stenciled letters. Authorized personnel only. And below that, barely legible, Site 14. Site 14. The words meant nothing to her, but they settled into her chest like stones. The door wasn't locked, or rather, it had been once, but time and rust had done their work. The mechanism was frozen in place, but the door itself hung slightly ajar, as if whoever had sealed it last had been in a hurry and hadn't quite closed it all the way. Maya placed her hand against the cold steel and pushed. It resisted at first, then groaned open on hinges that screamed with disuse, the sound echoing into the darkness beyond like the cry of something ancient awakening. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what Maya discovers inside, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring you more mysterious tales like this one. Now, let's follow Maya into the darkness. She stepped through into a tunnel. Not a natural cave formation but a corridor carved directly into the mountain, reinforced with steel beams and lined with more concrete. Emergency lights ran along the ceiling, their bulbs long dead, their fixtures coated in dust. The floor was smooth beneath her boots. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, each one identical to the first, heavy steel, marked with numbers and cryptic designations. B7, C12, storage, medical, communications. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was impossible. There were no government installations in these mountains, no military bases, no research stations. Pinewood was a nowhere town, a dot on the map where tourists sometimes stopped for gas on their way to better ski resorts and more scenic vistas. The most exciting thing that had happened here in the last decade was when the Johnsons' barn burned down and it turned out their insurance had lapsed. But here was evidence of something else entirely. Something hidden. Something forgotten. She moved deeper into the facility, her phone's light sweeping across walls covered in faded posters about radiation safety and proper decontamination procedures. The posters were done in that distinctive style of Cold War-era graphic design. Bold colors, simple illustrations, cheerful fonts delivering terrifying instructions. In case of nuclear attack, shelter procedures, contamination zones. The words swam before her eyes, each one adding another layer to the growing sense of unreality. A bunker. This was a bunker. A massive underground complex built into the mountain itself, hidden from the world above, constructed with the kind of resources that suggested government involvement at the highest levels. But when? And why? And most importantly, why had no one in Pinewood ever mentioned it? Maya tried to remember her history. She'd grown up here, gone to Pinewood Elementary and then the regional high school. She'd learned about the Cold War in social studies class, about the Cuban Missile Crisis and mutually assured destruction and the constant fear of nuclear annihilation that had defined a generation. But none of her teachers had ever mentioned a bunker. None of the old-timers who gathered at Murphy's to tell stories about the good old days had ever said a word about secret military installations in the mountains. The silence in the corridor was absolute. Not the peaceful quiet of the wilderness, but something heavier, more oppressive. The silence of a place that had been sealed away from time itself. Maya's footsteps echoed with each careful step. Dust motes danced in her phone's beam, disturbed for the first time in who knew how many years. She found the first body in what appeared to be a break room. The door had been propped open with a metal chair, and inside, slumped against the far wall beneath a faded poster encouraging proper nutrition, was a skeleton in the tattered remains of what might have been a uniform. The bones were brown with age, the fabric rotted away to almost nothing. A name tag was barely visible on the remains of the shirt. Morrison. No first name, just Morrison, who had died here in this forgotten place, far from the sun and the sky and everything that made life worth living. Maya backed out of the room, her breath coming in short gasps. Her hands shook as she tried to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a bunker. This was a tomb. A place where people had come and never left. Where something had gone terribly wrong. She should leave. She should get out of here, call the sheriff, let someone else deal with whatever this was. But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't, because there was something else pulling at her now, something beyond curiosity or shock. A feeling that she'd stumbled onto something important, something that needed to be understood. And maybe, somewhere in the back of her mind, a whisper of recognition, a sense that this place somehow was connected to her family, to the questions she'd stopped asking years ago about why her father had sometimes woken screaming in the night, why he'd kept certain rooms locked, why he'd made her promise never to go exploring in the high country without telling someone exactly where she'd be. The corridor branched. Maya chose the left path, following signs that pointed toward command center and primary operations. The tunnel sloped downward, taking her deeper into the mountain's heart. More doors. More rooms filled with equipment she couldn't identify. Banks of dead monitors, control panels with switches and dials, filing cabinets that stood like silent sentinels guarding their paper secrets. And then she found the central chamber. It opened before her like a cathedral, a vast space carved out of solid rock and reinforced with a latticework of steel beams that rose up into shadow. The ceiling had to be 30 feet high at least. The room was circular, with multiple levels connected by metal staircases and catwalks. At the center stood what looked like a massive machine. All curves and angles, covered in dials and gauges and thick cables that snaked away into the darkness. It had the brutal functionality of military technology, but there was something else about it too. Something almost elegant in its design. Something that spoke of minds working at the very edge of human understanding. Maya descended the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, her phone's light inadequate for illuminating the full scope of what she was seeing. On the walls, she could make out more posters, more instructions, more warnings. But these were different from the others. These spoke of containment protocols and dimensional stability and quantum field generators. Words that sounded like science fiction. Words that made her skin prickle with a fear she couldn't quite name. At the base of the central machine, she found a logbook. It sat on a metal desk that had been pushed against the machine's housing, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Maya picked it up carefully, her grease-stained fingers almost absurdly gentle as she opened the cover. The first entry was dated September 3, 1962. The handwriting was precise, each letter formed with care. Day 1 of the operational phase. The device has achieved stable resonance. Dr. Chen believes we are ready to proceed with the first test. Colonel Reyes has authorized the attempt. Colonel Reyes. Maya's blood went cold. Her father's name had been Miguel Reyes. He'd been military once, back before she was born. Back when he'd returned to Pinewood with shadows in his eyes and started the auto repair shop like he was building a wall between himself and whatever he'd left behind. He'd never talked about his service. Never mentioned where he'd been stationed or what he'd done. He'd just been Dad, quiet, steady, always smelling like motor oil and Old Spice. Always there with rough hands and rougher wisdom. Colonel Reyes. The pieces were falling into place, each one landing with the weight of revelation. This was why her father had known these mountains so well. Why he'd warned her about certain areas. Why he'd made her memorize emergency procedures she'd thought were just his paranoia. He'd been here. He'd worked here. He'd been part of whatever this place was, whatever secret it held. Maya flipped through the logbook, scanning entries that grew increasingly frantic as the dates progressed. September 5th. Anomalous readings during Test 3. Dr. Chen recommends pause. Colonel Reyes insists we continue. September 9th. The barrier is thinning. We can see through now, just glimpses, but enough. Enough to know we should stop. September 12th. Morrison is dead. The exposure was too much. Colonel Reyes has ordered a full lockdown. No one leaves until we understand what we've done. The entries ended on September 15, 1962. The final words, written in a hand that shook with either fear or exhaustion or both. God forgive us. We've opened something that should have stayed closed. Reyes is trying to seal it, but I don't think we can. I don't think we. The sentence was never finished. Maya stood in that vast underground chamber, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, holding her father's secrets in her hands. Outside, the October sun was probably setting, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold. But down here, there was only darkness and the weight of questions that demanded answers. What had they done here? What had they opened? And why, after all these years, had the doe's blood trail led her to this exact spot, to this exact door, as if the mountain itself wanted her to know? The silence pressed in around her. And in that silence, from somewhere deeper in the facility, came a sound that made her blood freeze. A hum, low and steady, like machinery powering up after a long sleep, like something waking, like something that had been waiting all these years for someone to finally come back. Maya gripped the logbook tighter and turned toward the sound. Whatever her father had been part of, whatever he'd tried to seal away, it wasn't over. The story that had ended in 1962 was beginning again, and she was standing at its center, a mechanic from a nowhere town who'd followed a trail of blood into the heart of a secret that could change everything. The hum grew louder, and Maya Reyes, daughter of shadows and secrets, took her first step deeper into the darkness. Maya didn't run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, but she was done running from things she didn't understand. The hum came from deeper in the facility, beyond the central chamber, through a corridor marked with yellow and black hazard stripes that had faded to ghost colors in the darkness. Maya followed it, her phone's light cutting a thin path through the gloom, the logbook tucked under her arm like evidence at a crime scene. Each step took her farther from the world she knew, deeper into a past that her father had tried to bury. The concrete walls seemed to press in around her, and the air grew colder with each descending stairwell. Each sealed door she managed to pry open with strength born of equal parts determination and desperation. She'd always been strong. Physical work did that to you. Years of lifting engine blocks and wrestling with rusted bolts and refusing to ask for help because asking for help meant admitting you couldn't do it alone. Her father had taught her that. Not with words necessarily, but with examples. Miguel Reyes had been a man who carried his burdens in silence, who fixed what was broken and never complained about the weight of it. He taught Maya to change oil before she could ride a bike, to diagnose engine problems by sound before she'd learned algebra, to understand that everything mechanical had a logic to it, a reason for its behavior if you were patient enough to find it. But people weren't machines. People were messy and complicated and full of secrets that didn't follow diagnostic flowcharts. And Miguel Reyes had been the most complicated of all. Maya remembered the nightmares. Her father's screaming in the night when she was 7, his face twisted with terror and guilt. Her mother's sad attempts to comfort him. Just a bad dream, he'd told Maya the next morning. She'd believed him then. Now she understood he'd been carrying this burden all along. The hum grew louder as Maya descended another level. The facility seemed to go on forever, burrowing into the mountain like a worm into an apple. She passed more rooms, living quarters with bunk beds and personal effects still scattered about as if their owners had just stepped out for a moment. A cafeteria with tables set for meals that would never be eaten. A medical bay with examination tables and equipment that looked primitive now but had probably been cutting edge in 1962. In one room, she found a wall covered in photographs. Men and women in military uniforms and lab coats, posing with the stiff formality of official portraits. And there, in the front row of one photo, was a face she recognized. Her father. Younger, his hair dark instead of gray, his shoulders straight instead of bent by years of labor. But the eyes were the same, dark and intelligent and carrying a shadow she'd never been able to name. He stood next to a woman in a lab coat, Asian, maybe in her 40s, with kind eyes and a slight smile. The caption below read, Dr. Sarah Chen and Colonel Miguel Reyes, Project Threshold Leadership Team, 1961. Project Threshold. Maya stared at the photo, trying to reconcile the man in the uniform with the man who'd taught her to rebuild carburetors and change transmission fluid. Her father had been important here, a leader, someone who'd made decisions that affected God knew how many lives. And then he'd walked away from it all, sealed it up, and spent the rest of his life fixing cars in a town so small it barely had a zip code. Why? The question burned in her chest. Her father had died 3 years ago, a massive heart attack that took him so fast he'd barely had time to hit the ground. One moment he'd been explaining to Mrs. Patterson why her Buick needed new brake pads. The next he was gone. Maya had been the one to find him, sprawled on the shop floor with grease still on his hands and that permanent look of concentration still etched into his weathered face. She'd held him while the paramedics worked, had whispered that she loved him, had begged him not to leave her with so many things unsaid. But dead men don't answer questions, and Miguel Reyes had taken his secrets with him into the dark. Or so she'd thought. The corridor opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but no less impressive. The hum was coming from here, emanating from a cylindrical structure that rose from floor to ceiling like a massive battery or reactor core. It glowed faintly, a blue-white luminescence that pulsed in slow, steady rhythms like a heartbeat. The light was enough that Maya could turn off her phone's flashlight and still see. Control panels surrounded the cylinder, their screens somehow still active, displaying readouts and graphs and scrolling data that meant nothing to her. But the fact that they were active at all after 60-some years was impossible, was terrifying. Maya approached slowly, half expecting alarms or security systems or some last failsafe to stop her. Nothing happened. The chamber was empty except for her and the humming cylinder and the ghost of her father's presence hanging in the stale air. She could almost see him here, younger and harder, making impossible decisions in this impossible place. She could almost hear his voice, that low, gravelly tone he'd used when explaining complicated things. Everything has a purpose, Mija. Even the broken things. Especially the broken things. The control panel nearest her had a keyboard, old-fashioned, the kind with actual mechanical switches. Above it, a monitor displayed a blinking cursor and a simple prompt. Authentication required. Maya stared at it for a long moment, then, almost without thinking, typed her father's name. Miguel Reyes. Access denied. She tried variations. Reyes. Colonel Reyes. Reyes. Miguel. Each one returned the same cold rejection. She was about to give up when a memory surfaced. Something her father used to say when she was frustrated with a repair, when a bolt wouldn't budge or an engine wouldn't cooperate. Patience, Maida. Patience and the right angle of approach. Maida. His nickname for her. Little Maya. She typed, Maida. The screen flickered. Text appeared, scrolling faster than she could read, and then resolved into a message that made her breath catch. Welcome, Mya. I've been waiting. The words hung there on the screen, impossible and undeniable. Her father had programmed this, had known somehow that she would find this place, had left her a key hidden in a nickname only he had used. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for the keyboard again, but before she could type anything, the screen changed. A video file began to play, and there he was, her father. Not the old man who died in the shop, but not the young colonel from the photograph either. Something in between. Maybe in his 40s, his hair graying at the temples, his face lined with exhaustion. He was sitting in what looked like this very chamber, the cylinder glowing behind him, his eyes fixed on the camera with an intensity that reached across decades. Mija, he said, and Maya's throat tightened at the sound of his voice. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you found threshold. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I wanted to spare you this. Wanted to take these secrets to my grave. But your mother, Elena, convinced me. She said you deserved to know. Said you were strong enough to handle the truth. I hope she was right. He paused, looking down at his hands, and Maya saw the same gesture he'd made 1,000 times when wrestling with difficult thoughts. I don't know how much you've figured out already. The facility, the project, the photos and the logbooks and all the evidence we left behind when we sealed this place. So let me fill in the gaps. Let me tell you what we did here. What I did here. Her father's image shifted, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. In 1960, the military was exploring alternative technologies, defense applications beyond nuclear weapons. We knew the Soviets were doing the same, and we couldn't afford to fall behind. Dr. Chen Sarah, she'd published a paper about quantum field manipulation. Theoretical stuff, mostly, but the brass saw potential. They gave her funding, a team, and this facility. And they gave her me to keep everything running smoothly. Miguel Reyes smiled, but there was no humor in it. We called it Project Threshold because we were trying to open doorways. Not physical doors, but dimensional ones. Access points to other places, other realities. Sounds insane, I know. Like something from a science fiction novel. But Sarah made it work. By God. She actually made it work. The video flickered, and when it stabilized, her father looked older somehow. More haunted. The first test was September 3, 1962. We activated the device, that cylinder behind me, and for 30 seconds we opened a window. Not to another country or another planet, but to somewhere else. Somewhere that shouldn't exist. We saw things through that window, Maya. Impossible things. Beautiful and terrible, and so far beyond our understanding that even Sarah, brilliant as she was, couldn't explain them. He stopped, his jaw working like he was forcing himself to continue. We should have stopped then. Should have shut it all down and sealed the research away. But I didn't. I authorized more tests, pushed the team harder, told myself we were doing it for national security, for the future, for all the right reasons. But really, I think I just wanted to see more. Wanted to understand. wanted to prove we could control it. Maya watched as her father's face crumpled with an old grief. We lost Morrison on September 12th. Direct exposure to the field when containment failed. It didn't kill him right away, that might have been kinder. He lasted 3 days, screaming about things he'd seen, things that were coming through. And then, on September 15th, during our final test, something did come through. The video quality degraded for a moment, static washing across the image. When it cleared, her father was standing, pacing, unable to sit still. We managed to close the threshold. Barely. Sarah sacrificed herself to do it, stayed at the controls while the rest of us evacuated. Sealed herself in with the device and ran it in reverse, pulling the breach closed. The radiation killed her. Killed everyone who stayed behind to help. 19 people dead because I couldn't leave well enough alone. He stopped pacing and looked directly at the camera, directly at Maya across the gulf of years. I sealed this place, erased it from official records, called in every favor I'd ever earned to make sure it stayed buried. And then I came home to Pinewood, to your mother, to the life I should have been living all along. I opened the repair shop because I needed to fix things. Real, simple, mechanical things that didn't open doorways to hell. I never told Elena the details. Never told anyone. Carried it alone because that was my penance. His expression softened then, and Maya saw the father she'd known. The man who'd taught her to use a socket wrench. The man who'd made terrible pancakes every Sunday morning. The man who'd held her when her first boyfriend broke her heart and told her that anyone who couldn't see how special she was didn't deserve her time. But here's the thing, Mija. The threshold. It didn't stay closed. Not completely. We weakened something when we opened it. Created a permanent scar in reality. Nothing catastrophic, just a thin spot, a place where the walls between worlds are paper thin. I've been monitoring it for 40 years. Coming up here every few months to check the instruments I hid in the mountains, to make sure nothing's changed. And so far, it's been stable. Dormant. He paused, and something shifted in his eyes. Fear. Real, bone-deep fear. But if you're watching this, if you've found your way here, then something's changed. The facility's defenses were designed to activate only if the threshold started to open again. If you're inside, if the lights are on and the systems are running, then the scar is widening. Something's coming through again. Or maybe trying to come through. Either way, you need to understand what you're dealing with. Miguel Reyes reached into his pocket and pulled out what looked like a key card, holding it up to the camera. I left you tools, Maya. Equipment. Instructions. Everything you'll need is in the Secure Vault Level 7, Section B. The access code is your birthday. And Mija, listen to me carefully. You don't have to do this. You can walk away right now. Call the military, report what you found, let them handle it. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. He smiled then, sad and proud all at once. But you won't walk away. You're too much like me. Too stubborn, too curious, too unwilling to leave a problem unsolved. Your mother knew that. She said if anyone could finish what I started, it would be you. Said you had my stubbornness and her heart, and that combination could move mountains. The video flickered again, beginning to degrade. Her father's final words came through in pieces, breaking apart like a transmission from somewhere very far away. Whatever happens, know that I'm proud of you. Always was. The device controls are straightforward. Sarah's notes will help. And Maya, if it comes down to a choice, choose life. Choose the world. Not the threshold. Not the secrets. Promise me. The screen went black. Maya stood in the humming chamber, tears streaming down her face, her father's voice still echoing in her ears. This story took considerable time and effort to create. If you're invested in Maya's journey and want to know if she can fix what her father couldn't, please hit the like button and share this with someone who loves suspenseful stories. Your support means everything. Now back to Maya's impossible choice. He'd known. All those years, all those nightmares, all those moments when he'd seemed to be somewhere else entirely. He'd been carrying this. Carrying the weight of 19 deaths and an open wound in reality itself. And he'd programmed this facility to call to her if that wound started to bleed again. She wasn't just her father's daughter. She was his successor, his last hope, the one person he'd trusted to finish what he couldn't. The cylinder pulsed brighter, its hum increasing in frequency. Maya could feel it in her bones, in her teeth, a vibration that seemed to resonate with something fundamental. The air in the chamber shimmered, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, she saw something. A shape in the distortion. Presence. There and gone so fast she couldn't be sure she'd seen anything at all. But she had. She knew she had. Maya wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. She thought about her father, about the man who'd spent 40 years atoning for what he'd done here. She thought about her mother, who'd died of cancer 10 years ago but who'd known these secrets too, who'd carried them with the same quiet strength she'd shown in everything else. She thought about the shop waiting for her down in Pinewood, the broken cars and broken people who needed her skills, the simple life she'd built that now seemed impossibly fragile. And then she thought about what her father had said, "You're too much like me. Too stubborn, too curious, too unwilling to leave a problem unsolved." He'd been right. Damn him, he'd been right. Maya picked up the logbook, checked her phone. No signal this deep, but the battery was still good, and headed for the exit that would take her to level 7. To the vault. To whatever tools and answers her father had left behind. She had work to do. The kind of work that didn't involve carburetors or brake pads, but work nonetheless. The kind that might save the world or end it. As she climbed the stairs, she found herself talking to her father like he was still there, still watching. "I hope you left good instructions, Dad, because if I'm going to fix this thing, I'm going to need a hell of a repair manual." The facility hummed around her, ancient and alive, waiting to see what Miguel Reyes's daughter would do, waiting to see if she was strong enough, smart enough, stubborn enough to close the door her father had opened so many years ago. Maya Reyes, mechanic and daughter of secrets, descended into the mountain's heart with grease-stained hands and her mother's heart and her father's determination. And somewhere in the thin places between worlds, something stirred. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally come back. Something that had unfinished business with the Reyes family. The threshold was opening again. And this time there might not be anyone left to close it. Level 7 was different from the upper floors. Where the facility above had felt abandoned, frozen in time like a museum exhibit, the deeper levels felt active. Alive. The emergency lighting here still functioned, casting everything in a dim amber glow that made shadows dance in the corners of Maya's vision. The air was warmer, almost uncomfortably so, and carried a metallic taste that coated her tongue and made her think of blood and copper wiring and things that shouldn't exist in the same thought. The descent had taken 20 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly narrow corridors and down stairs that seemed to spiral endlessly into the mountain's core. Maya's legs burned with the effort, and her phone battery had dropped to 40%. She made a mental note to conserve it. The flashlight function was draining power faster than she'd anticipated, and she had no idea how long she'd be down here. No idea if she'd even make it back out. That thought should have terrified her. Should have sent her scrambling back toward the surface, toward sunlight and sanity and the world she understood. But instead, it settled over her like a familiar weight, the same feeling she got when facing a particularly stubborn engine problem. This was a puzzle, a mechanical challenge. Her father had left her the pieces. She just had to figure out how they fit together. Section B revealed itself through a heavy blast door marked with faded hazard symbols, and the words "Authorized personnel, only, level 7 clearance required." Maya stood before it, remembering her father's instructions. "The access code is your birthday." She found the keypad beside the door, its buttons worn smooth by decades of use, and punched in the numbers. 0-7-1-5-9-2. July 15, 1992. The day she'd come screaming into the world at Pinewood General Hospital. A month early and already stubborn, according to her mother's stories. The keypad beeped once, then twice. Then the blast door groaned and began to slide open, moving with surprising smoothness for something so old. Beyond it lay a vault that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film. Walls lined with equipment cases, weapons lockers, and filing cabinets. Computer servers hummed softly in one corner, their indicator lights blinking in patient rhythms. A workstation dominated the center of the room, multiple monitors arranged in a semicircle around an ergonomic chair that had definitely been added much later than 1962. Her father's workspace, his secret command center, the place he'd been coming to for 40 years while everyone in Pinewood thought he was just hiking or fishing or getting away from the noise of the shop. Maya stepped inside, and motion sensors activated additional lighting, flooding the vault with cold white illumination that made her squint. On the central desk lay a thick binder with her name written on the cover in her father's distinctive handwriting. Next to it sat a photograph in a simple frame, her parents on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy, her mother's head thrown back in laughter at something her father had just said. Maya picked up the photo with trembling hands, studying her mother's face. Elena had known, had carried these secrets alongside Miguel, had probably stood in this very room, discussing impossible things and making impossible choices. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maya whispered to the photograph. "Why didn't either of you prepare me for this?" But she knew the answer. They'd been protecting her, giving her a normal life for as long as possible, hoping, maybe, that the threshold would stay closed forever and she'd never have to know what her father had done, what legacy he'd left in her hands. Maya set the photo down and opened the binder. Inside, she found her father's handwriting covering page after page, detailed notes, diagrams, equations, and step-by-step instructions. The first page was a letter, dated 3 months before his death. "Mija," it began. "If you're reading this, then my heart finally gave out, and the threshold is becoming active again. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry that this burden has fallen to you. But I've spent 40 years preparing for this moment. 40 years gathering information and resources and building contingencies. Everything you need is here. Everything Sarah Chen and I learned about the threshold, about the device, about what lies on the other side. Read carefully, learn quickly, and remember you're not just fixing a machine. You're repairing a wound in reality itself. No pressure, right?" Despite everything, Maya smiled. Even in a letter written for the end of the world, her father had managed to inject his dry humor. It was so completely him that it made her chest ache. She began reading in earnest, turning pages as her father's notes unfolded the full scope of Project Threshold. The science was complex: quantum field theory, dimensional mathematics, concepts that made her mechanics training seem laughably inadequate. But her father had anticipated that. He'd included simplified explanations, diagrams that broke down the incomprehensible into something approaching understandable. And slowly, piece by piece, Maya began to grasp what she was dealing with. The device, the cylinder in the chamber above, was essentially a controlled tear in spacetime. When activated, it opened a doorway to what Dr. Chen had called adjacent realities. Not parallel universes in the science fiction sense, but spaces that existed alongside normal reality, separated by the thinnest of membranes. These spaces weren't empty. They were inhabited by entities, beings that existed in states that violated everything humans understood about physics and biology. Beings that were aware, intelligent, and very, very interested in our world. The 1962 incident hadn't just opened a door. It had rung a doorbell. Let something know that humanity existed, that we were here, that we could reach across the divide. And when Sarah Chen had sealed the breach, she'd done it imperfectly. Left a scar. A thin spot where the membrane between worlds was permanently weakened. For 40 years, that scar had been stable. But the scars didn't last forever. They weakened. They reopened. And according to her father's monitoring data, the scar had been showing signs of degradation for the past 5 years. Small fluctuations. Minor breaches that lasted microseconds. Nothing catastrophic, but trending in the wrong direction. And now, for some reason, it was accelerating. Maya found a section labeled Repair Protocols, and read with increasing dread. Her father had developed 3 potential solutions, each more desperate than the last. Option 1. Reactivate the device in reverse, essentially repeating what Dr. Chen had done but with better equipment and more knowledge. Success probability, 60%. Risk of catastrophic breach, 25%. Option 2. Use shaped charges to collapse the chamber and bury the device under 1,000 tons of rock, essentially quarantining the scar. Success probability, 40%. Risk of making things worse, significant. Option 3. Full device activation, opening the threshold completely and attempting to negotiate with whatever was on the other side. Option 3 had been crossed out in red ink with the words, "Absolute last resort. Do not attempt unless extinction-level breach imminent," written beside it. Maya sat back in the chair, her mind reeling. This was insane. This was impossible. She fixed cars. She changed oil and replaced brake pads and occasionally welded exhaust systems. She wasn't qualified to repair holes in reality. She wasn't equipped to negotiate with interdimensional entities. She wasn't. The lights flickered. Maya's head snapped up, her body tensing. The servers in the corner had stopped humming. The monitors on the desk went dark. For 3 heartbeats, the vault was completely silent, completely dark. And in that darkness, Maya heard something. A sound like wind chimes, like breaking glass, like a voice speaking words in a language that hurt to hear. Then the lights came back on, dimmer than before, and the servers restarted with a whine that sounded almost like a scream. Maya was on her feet, her heart hammering. That wasn't a power fluctuation. That was something else. Something responding to her presence here, to her reading these notes, to her very existence in this place. The threshold was more than just active. I was aware. She grabbed the binder and headed for the door, but stopped when she spotted something she'd missed before. A locker marked with her father's name. Inside, she found a tactical vest with equipment she recognized from action movies. Flashlights, first aid supplies, energy bars, and water bottles. But also things that made her blood run cold. A Geiger counter, a breathing mask, and a handgun with 3 loaded magazines. Her father had been preparing for war. Or at least preparing for the possibility that his daughter might need to fight for her life in this godforsaken place. Maya strapped on the vest. It was too big for her, designed for her father's broader frame, but it would work, and took the gun after a moment's hesitation. She'd never fired a weapon in her life. Her father had offered to teach her once, but she'd refused, finding the whole idea distasteful. Now she wished she'd paid attention. She checked the safety, made sure it was engaged, and holstered it at her hip with hands that shook only a little. The corridor outside the vault felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper, more substantial, as if they were made of something heavier than the absence of light. Maya moved quickly, her boots echoing on the concrete, the binder clutched under one arm. She needed to get back to the main chamber, to the device itself. Her father's notes had specified that all control systems were located there, that any attempt to stabilize the threshold would require direct access to the cylinder. She was halfway there when she heard the footsteps. Not her footsteps, others, coming from somewhere ahead, from the direction of the central chamber. Heavy boots on concrete. Multiple people, moving with purpose. Maya froze, her mind racing. She was 7 levels underground in a facility that had been sealed for 60 years. There shouldn't be anyone else here. Couldn't be anyone else here. Unless they'd been waiting, watching, following her from the surface. She pressed herself against the wall and waited, barely breathing, as the footsteps grew louder. 3 people, maybe 4, moving in formation like they had military training. Maya's hand moved to the gun at her hip, then stopped. She didn't know how to use it, and firing blindly in these corridors would be suicide. Instead, she looked for options. A side corridor branched off to her left, leading toward what her mental map suggested was the old medical bay. She could hide there, wait for them to pass, then circle back to the chamber. But before she could move, a voice called out, echoing down the corridor with casual authority. "Maya Reyes, we know you're down here. We've been tracking your phone signal since you entered the facility. There's no point in hiding." The voice was male, mid-40s maybe, with a slight southern accent that reminded her of the military recruiters who'd come to her high school years ago. Maya's throat tightened. Her phone, of course. She'd been so focused on finding answers that she hadn't thought about basic operational security. Hadn't considered that someone might be monitoring electronic signals coming from a supposedly abandoned facility. But who? And how did they know about this place? "We're not here to hurt you," the voice continued, closer now. "We're here to help, to contain the situation before it escalates. Your father was working with us before he died. We're the ones who helped him monitor the threshold all these years. We're on the same side." Maya's mind worked furiously. Her father's notes hadn't mentioned any organization, any group that knew about Project Threshold. He'd written as if he'd been working alone, conducting his monitoring missions in secret. But maybe that was the point. Maybe he'd kept certain information out of the binder deliberately, knowing that if she was reading it, he couldn't be there to explain the complications. Or maybe these people were lying. She made a decision, stepped out from the wall and into the center of the corridor, hands visible, the gun holstered but accessible. A moment later, four figures rounded the corner ahead, all wearing black tactical gear and carrying weapons that made Maya's borrowed handgun look like a toy. They moved like professionals, covering angles and watching for threats with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from real training. The leader was a tall man with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had seen too much sun. He lowered his rifle when he saw Maya, though his three companions kept theirs raised. His eyes went to the vest she was wearing, to the binder under her arm, and something that might have been respect flickered across his features. "Colonel Reyes's daughter," he said, not quite a question. "You look just like your mother. Who are you?" Maya's voice was steadier than she felt. "My name is Richard Chen. Dr. Sarah Chen was my aunt." He gestured to his companions. "We're part of an organization called Threshold Watch. We've been monitoring sites like this one for 60 years, making sure that what your father and my aunt started doesn't end the world. And right now, Miss Reyes, we have a serious problem." Maya's grip on the binder tightened. "The scar is widening." Chen nodded, looking both surprised and impressed. "Faster than we expected. The activation sequence you triggered when you accessed the vault, your father's failsafe, accelerated the degradation. We estimate we have maybe 12 hours before full breach. Maybe less. 12 hours until what? Until something comes through." Chen's expression was grim. "The entities on the other side, they've been pushing against the scar for decades, testing it, looking for weaknesses. Your presence here, the facility systems coming online, it's like blood in the water. They know someone's here. They know the door is unlocked. And they're coming." One of Chen's companions, a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, spoke up. "We need to implement Protocol Zero, collapse the facility and bury it. It's the only way to be sure." "That's option 2, Maya said, remembering her father's notes. 40% success rate and a significant risk of making things worse. My father didn't think it was reliable." Chen's eyes narrowed. "You've read his notes. Good. Then you know we don't have many choices. Option 1, attempting to seal the breach properly requires expertise we don't have. Your father spent 40 years trying to figure it out, and he never cracked it. Dr. Chen's sacrifice bought us time, but her method isn't repeatable. Mathematics doesn't work anymore. The scars changed too much." "What about option 3? The corridor went silent. Chen and his team exchanged looks, and Maya saw something like fear flicker between them. Finally, Chen spoke, his voice low and tight. "Option 3 is not an option. Full activation would mean opening the threshold completely, giving whatever's on the other side unrestricted access to our world. Your father put that in his notes as a deterrent, a reminder of what failure would look like. It's not a solution, it's surrender." Maya thought about her father's crossed-out notation, about the desperation that must have driven him to even consider such a thing. But he wrote it down, put it in the binder. If it was truly unthinkable, he wouldn't have included it at all. "Your father was thorough to a fault," Chen replied. "He documented everything, even the worst-case scenarios. But trust me, Miss Reyes, I knew Miguel. He would never have wanted you to even consider option 3. The risks are—" He stopped mid-sentence, his head cocking to the side like he was listening to something. His team did the same, their weapons coming up, their stances shifting to high alert. Maya felt it too. A change in the air pressure, a thrumming vibration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and in the darkness, Maya saw them. Shapes. Humanoid but wrong, their proportions slightly off, their movements too fluid and too angular at the same time. They stood in the corridor behind Chen's team, visible only in the darkness, vanishing when the lights returned. But they'd been there, real enough to leave afterimages burned into Maya's retinas, real enough to make her understand exactly how much danger they were in. Contact. The woman who'd spoken earlier opened fire, her rifle barking in the confined space with deafening intensity. Her companions joined in, filling the corridor with muzzle flashes and the acrid smell of gunpowder. But there was nothing to shoot. When the lights were on, the corridor was empty. When they flickered off, the shapes were there, closer each time, moving with impossible speed. Chen grabbed Maya's arm. Run. Get to the chamber. We'll hold them here. But, go. Your father left those notes for you, not us. Whatever he wanted you to do, whatever he thought you could accomplish, you need to do it now. We're out of time. Maya ran. Behind her, the gunfire intensified, punctuated by screams that cut off too quickly. She didn't look back, couldn't afford to. She focused on moving forward, on navigating the corridors by memory and instinct, on reaching the central chamber where the cylinder waited. The facility was falling apart around her. No, that wasn't quite right. It was transforming. The concrete walls seemed to ripple like water. Doors that had been closed were now open, revealing rooms that shouldn't exist, spaces that extended farther than the mountain's dimensions should allow. Maya passed a cafeteria that stretched into infinite distance, tables and chairs repeated in impossible geometric patterns. She passed a corridor that seemed to fold in on itself, Escher-like, defying every law of physics she understood. The threshold wasn't just opening. It was bleeding into their reality, warping the facility, turning it into a hybrid space where two worlds overlapped. And in that overlap, things that should never coexist were being forced together, creating a nightmarish landscape that hurt to perceive with human senses. Maya burst into the central chamber and nearly fell down the stairs in her haste. The cylinder was fully active now, pulsing with blinding blue-white light, its hum so intense that she could feel it in her bones, in her teeth, in the spaces between her thoughts. The control panels around it had all come to life, displays scrolling data faster than any human could read. And there, visible through the cylinder's translucent housing, was the threshold itself. A tear in space, a wound in reality, a doorway to somewhere else. Through it, Maya could see things, impossible to describe, impossible to look at directly without feeling her mind start to slip. Geometries that violated Euclidean space. Colors that existed outside the visible spectrum but were somehow visible anyway. And entities, beings of pure thought and mathematics and hunger, pressing against the membrane, reaching through with appendages that might have been arms or tentacles or pure probability given form. They were beautiful. They were horrifying. They were coming through. Maya stumbled to the control panels, her father's binder clutched in one hand, her other hand racing across keyboards and switches. The instructions in the notes were clear, written for someone with mechanical aptitude even if they lacked advanced degrees. Step 1. Initialize primary containment field. Step 2. Redirect power to dimensional stabilizers. Step 3. Activate Chen protocol, the sequence Sarah Chen had designed in her final moments, the one that had sealed the breach before. But the system was fighting her. Something on the other side had learned, had adapted, was actively countering every command she input, turning her father's carefully planned protocols into a chess game where she was hopelessly outmatched. Come on, Maya muttered, her fingers flying. You're just another puzzle. And I don't lose to puzzles. But it wasn't just a machine. It was a doorway. And the things on the other side wanted through so badly that they were willing to burn through every safeguard, every failsafe, every barrier that stood between their world and hers. Behind Maya, the chamber doors burst open. Richard Chen stumbled through, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, his rifle gone, his team nowhere in sight. He collapsed against the railing, breathing hard, his eyes wide with something beyond fear. "They're all dead," he gasped. "Martinez, Sullivan, Patterson, they're just gone. Those things, they don't kill you. They unmake you, pull you apart into component pieces and scatter you across dimensions. I only got away because they were focused on the others." Maya didn't stop working. Couldn't stop. The Chen protocol isn't working. The system's been compromised. Whatever's on the other side, it's smart enough to predict every move. Then we're out of options. We need to blow the charges and bury this place. Your aunt didn't die to buy us time, so we could just give up. Maya's voice cracked with frustration and fear and a grief she'd been carrying for 3 years. My father didn't spend 40 years preparing for this moment, so we could take the easy way out. There has to be another solution. There isn't. Your father was wrong. He was brilliant and dedicated and he did everything he could. But he was wrong. Some problems don't have solutions. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Maya stopped, turned to face Chen fully. Option 3. Absolutely not. It's the only thing we haven't tried. The only thing that might actually work. It would mean full activation, complete breach. You'd be inviting them into our world. Or, Maya said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, I'd be opening a dialogue. My father wrote that option 3 was negotiation. Not invasion. Negotiation. What if they're not monsters? What if they're just other, different? What if they've been trying to communicate this whole time and we've been treating them like a threat? Chun stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You can't possibly, they killed my team. They're killing people right now. Because we're fighting them. Because we opened a door, saw something we didn't understand, panicked, and tried to seal them away. What if they're just scared? What if they're defending themselves? That's insane. So is everything else about this situation. Maya gestured at the cylinder, at the impossible tear in space, at the facility falling apart around them. We're standing in a bunker built to weaponize reality itself. We're being hunted by things that exist in dimensions we can't even name. Insane is just where we live now. So why not try something different? Why not try listening instead of fighting? The lights flickered again, and in the darkness, the shapes appeared. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Surrounding the chamber on all sides, visible in every shadow, in every space where light should be but wasn't. They didn't attack, didn't move, just watched, waited, like they understood every word of the conversation and were curious to see what decision Maya would make. Chun looked around at them, his face pale, his body trembling. If you're wrong, if this goes badly, then we were dead anyway, Maya finished. At least this way, we die trying something new. She turned back to the controls and found the option 3 protocols. They were complex, requiring a complete power surge to the device, a full opening of the threshold, and her blood ran cold as she read this part, a human anchor. Someone to stand at the threshold itself, to act as a bridge between worlds, to facilitate communication through direct contact. Essentially, someone to offer themselves as a sacrifice. Or an ambassador. The notes weren't clear which. Maya looked at the cylinder, at the terrible beauty of the tear in space, at the entities waiting on the other side. She thought about her father, who'd carried this burden in silence. About her mother, who'd known and supported him anyway. About Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd given her life to seal the breach before. About all the choices that had led to this moment, all the paths that had narrowed down to this single impossible decision. Tell me something, she said to Richard Chun without looking away from the threshold. Your aunt, in her final moments. Do you know what she was thinking? Chun was quiet for a long moment. Then, she left a note. Brief, just a few words. It said, not monsters, just different. Wish we'd tried talking first. Maya nodded slowly. That was enough. That was all she needed to hear. She input the activation sequence, watched as the system accepted the commands, felt the cylinder begin to power up to levels it had never reached before. The hum became a roar. The light became blinding. The tear in space began to widen, spreading like a wound opening to reveal what lay beneath. And Maya Reyes, mechanic and daughter of secrets, walked toward the threshold with her hands raised and her heart hammering and her voice steady as she called out to the impossible things waiting on the other side. My name is Maya Reyes. My father was Miguel Reyes. He opened this door. He hurt you, and I'm here to make it right. I'm here to listen. I'm here to understand. Please, talk to me. The entities surged forward, filling the threshold, their forms becoming almost solid as they pressed against the rapidly thinning barrier. And for a terrible, eternal moment, Maya was certain she'd made the wrong choice, that Chen had been right, that she'd just doomed her world to invasion by things beyond comprehension. Then the entities stopped, pulled back slightly, and one of them, larger than the others, more coherent, almost approaching a form that human eyes could process, reached through the threshold with something that might have been a hand, touched Maya's outstretched palm, and the world exploded into light and sound and sensation so intense that Maya's mind simply shut down, unable to process the flood of information, unable to hold on to consciousness in the face of contact with something so fundamentally other. Her last thought before darkness took her was, "Dad, I hope you were right about me." Then there was nothing but the threshold, and the light, and the sound of two worlds finally trying to understand each other. Maya existed everywhere and nowhere at once. Her body was a distant memory, a small, fragile thing made of carbon and water and electrical impulses that seemed laughably inadequate for containing consciousness. She was spread across dimensions like paint across a canvas. Her awareness stretched so thin that she should have shattered, should have simply dissolved into the fundamental mathematics of the universe. But she didn't. Something was holding her together. Something was keeping her centered even as her mind expanded to touch spaces that had no names, no coordinates, no place in any map humans had ever drawn. She could see them now, the entities, not as the horrifying shapes she'd glimpsed in the darkness, but as they truly were. Beings of pure information and energy, existing as complex patterns in the fabric of reality itself. They weren't creatures in any biological sense. They were more like living equations, conscious mathematics, thoughts given form by the sheer intensity of their existence. And they were beautiful in a way that made her previous understanding of beauty seem like a child's crayon drawing compared to a Renaissance masterpiece. One of them, the one whose touch had initiated this contact, surrounded her now. Not physically, but conceptually. It had no body, no face, no gender, but Maya found herself thinking of it as him, anyway. Some instinct providing a framework her human mind could work with. He was vast, ancient, infinitely patient, and he was speaking to her, not in words but in pure meaning that bypassed language entirely and settled directly into her understanding. "You are brave," came the thought, resonating through every particle of her expanded consciousness. "Foolish but brave. Your father was the same way. We remember him. We remember his fear and his courage and the terrible choice he made." Maya tried to respond, tried to form thoughts coherent enough to bridge the gap between her human mind and this entity's incomprehensible awareness. It was like trying to explain color to someone who'd only ever known sound, trying to describe music to someone who'd only ever seen mathematics. But somehow, impossibly, she managed. "You knew my father? We knew what he did. We felt it. When your kind first opened the threshold, it was like a door appearing in a wall we didn't know existed. We reached through because we were curious, because we wanted to understand what you were, where you came from, why you existed in spaces we couldn't perceive. We meant no harm. But your father, he saw us as a threat, as invaders, and he was right to fear even if he was wrong about our intentions." Images flooded Maya's mind, not memories exactly, but impressions, emotions. She saw the first activation of the device through the entity's perspective, saw the tear opening in their reality, a wound in the fabric of their existence. She felt their confusion, their fascination, their desperate need to understand what had just happened. And she felt their shock when humans had started dying, not because the entities wanted to hurt them, but because contact itself was toxic. because human biology and interdimensional existence were fundamentally incompatible. Like mixing water and sodium, like touching a live wire. The interaction itself was deadly, regardless of intent. Morrison, Maya thought, remembering her father's notes. The first person who died. You didn't mean to kill him. We didn't understand what we were doing. We reached out to touch, to communicate, and he came apart, dissolved into his component elements. We tried to save him, tried to put him back together. But we didn't understand your structure, your biology. By the time we realized our touch was death, others had died too. 19 of your kind reduced to scattered atoms because we didn't know how fragile you were. And Dr. Chen? Sarah Chen? A shift in the presence surrounding her. Something that might have been respect or sorrow or both at once. She understood. In her final moments, as she ran the device in reverse, as she sacrificed herself to close the threshold, she broadcast a message. A plea. She asked us to forgive your kind for being afraid. She asked us to wait, to be patient, to give you time to learn. She promised that someday, someone would come who could bridge the gap. Someone who could help both our kinds understand each other. Tears that Maya didn't actually have in her current formless state somehow managed to form anyway. She was talking about me. She was talking about hope. About the possibility that fear and ignorance wouldn't define the relationship between our peoples forever. Your father believed it too. He spent the rest of his life preparing for this moment. Preparing you whether you knew it or not. Every skill he taught you, every value he instilled, every moment he spent teaching you to fix what was broken, it was all leading to this. To you standing at the threshold and choosing to listen instead of fight. Maya's awareness drifted through the space between spaces, processing revelations that rewrote everything she thought she knew. But you've been trying to come through again. For 60 years, you've been pushing against the scar. Chen, Richard Chen, he said you were trying to invade. We've been trying to heal it. The scar your Dr. Chen created when she sealed the threshold, it's not stable. It's like a wound that's been stitched closed but not properly cleaned. It's festering, growing infected. Left alone, it would have eventually torn open catastrophically, creating a massive breach that would have damaged both our realities. We've been reinforcing it from our side, trying to hold it together, but we can only do so much. The proper repair requires cooperation. Requires someone on your side willing to work with us. Then why did you attack Chen's team? Why did you kill them? The presence shifted again, and Maya sensed frustration, regret, and something like embarrassment. We didn't. Not intentionally. When your technology activated fully, when you accessed your father's systems, it created a surge in the threshold's activity. Some of our younger ones, less experienced, less controlled, they were drawn through the widening gaps. They don't understand your fragility the way we do. They're curious and eager, and they wanted to see, to touch, to experience this strange new world. By the time we could stop them, by the time we could pull them back, your people were already dying. We're trying to teach restraint, trying to make them understand. But it's difficult when the very nature of our existence is toxic to yours. Maya processed this, her expanded consciousness working through implications that would have taken hours to articulate in words. So we're incompatible. Contact kills humans. Which means this conversation, this connection, is killing you. Yes, slowly. Your biology is breaking down at the cellular level. The exposure to our dimensional frequency is causing irreparable damage. We estimate you have perhaps 10 of your minutes before the deterioration becomes fatal. We're sorry. We're holding back as much as we can, filtering our presence through layers of mathematical abstraction to minimize the harm. But even this limited contact is too much for your form to withstand. The revelation should have terrified her, should have sent her screaming back to her body, desperate to salvage what remained of her life. But Maya Reyes had never been the type to run from hard truths. Then we need to work fast. You said the scar can be healed with cooperation. Tell me what needs to be done. It requires recalibration of your device. The cylinder. It's currently configured to tear open the threshold, to force a connection between our realities. But it can be modified, reversed, turned into a healing mechanism instead of a weapon. Your Dr. Chen understood this in her final moments. She left instructions in the device's core programming, equations and protocols that would allow for proper repair. But they require manual implementation. Someone needs to physically reconfigure the device while it's active, while the threshold is open, and the radiation levels during that process. No human could survive them. Except, Maya thought slowly, understanding crystallizing in her expanded awareness. Someone who's already dying from dimensional exposure. Someone who's already been fatally contaminated. Someone like me. Yes, you could do it. You have the knowledge, your father made sure of that. You have the time barely but enough. And you have the will. We can see that in you, Maya Reyes. The same stubbornness your father had. The same refusal to accept that some problems have no solutions. Maya felt herself smiling, or at least the conceptual equivalent of it. He used to say that everything can be fixed if you have the right tools and enough patience. He was correct, and you are his finest tool, his greatest legacy. Not because you can repair machines, but because you can repair the relationship between worlds. You can take what he started and finish it properly. You can give both our peoples a future where we can coexist, even if we can never safely touch. A future where the threshold isn't a wound but a window, where we can share knowledge and understanding across the divide without fear of mutual destruction. And all it costs is my life. Yes, we will not lie to you. We will not soften the truth. If you do this, if you reconfigure the device while serving as a living bridge between dimensions, you will die. There is no other outcome. Your biology cannot sustain this level of exposure. But your death would mean something, would save countless lives on both sides, would heal a wound that's been bleeding for 60 years. Maya thought about her father, working himself to exhaustion in the shop, coming home with oil under his fingernails and shadows in his eyes. She thought about her mother, who'd loved a haunted man and never complained about the secrets he carried. She thought about Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd stayed at the controls while everyone else evacuated, who'd given her life to buy humanity time. She thought about Morrison and Sullivan and Martinez and Patterson and all the others who died because two kinds of life had reached across the void without understanding what they were reaching toward. And she thought about Richard Chen, still in the chamber above, probably terrified and confused and waiting to see if his aunt's faith had been misplaced. She thought about Pinewood, about Murphy's Tavern and the regulars who gathered there, about Mrs. Patterson and her Buick and all the small, ordinary lives that would end if the threshold tore open completely. She thought about the world, beautiful and flawed and worth saving. How long do I have? She asked. In your time measurement? 7 minutes. Perhaps 8. The process will take 5 minutes once you begin. You'll be conscious for most of it. The pain will be considerable. I've rebuilt transmissions in July heat without air conditioning. I can handle considerable pain. She paused, then added, will you stay with me? I don't want to die alone. The presence surrounding her seemed to grow warmer, more solid, almost approaching something like an embrace. We will be with you until the end. And after, in our way, your pattern will remain with us, Maya Reyes. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as information, as for mathematics, as a permanent part of our collective understanding. You will become the bridge between our peoples, the first human to exist in our space as more than scattered atoms. Your father would be proud. Your mother would be proud. We are proud and we barely know you. Then let's get started, Maya said, feeling her consciousness beginning to contract, beginning to pull back toward her body and the terrible thing she needed to do. And when this is over, when the threshold is healed, you need to promise me something. If we can, we will. Take care of Richard Chen. Help him understand what happened here, what his aunt accomplished, what my father accomplished. Don't let him think they failed. Don't let him carry that weight. We promise. He will know the truth. And through him, perhaps eventually, your entire kind will understand. We'll learn that the universe is larger and stranger and more full of potential friendship than you ever imagined. Maya felt herself snapping back into her body like a rubber band released, and the sensation was agony. Every cell screamed in protest. Every nerve ending reported damage and wrongness and fundamental breakdown. She opened eyes that could barely focus and found herself on the floor of the chamber, her body convulsing, blood trickling from her nose and ears. The cylinder blazed above her, the threshold fully open now, a tear in space large enough to drive a truck through. Richard Chen was kneeling beside her, his face pale, his hands hovering uselessly over her body, like he wanted to help but didn't know how. Jesus Christ, what did they do to you? What happened? They… Talk to me? Maya managed, her voice barely a whisper. Chen, listen. Your aunt was right. They're not monsters. Just different. The deaths, accidents, incompatibility. They want to help, want to heal the scar. But I need to reconfigure the device. Need you to help me up. You can't even stand. You need medical attention. I'm dying anyway. Dimensional exposure. Fatal. But I can still finish this. Can still fix what my father broke. She grabbed Chen's arm, her grip surprisingly strong despite her condition. Help me, please. This is what your aunt would want. What they both would want. Chen stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring across his face. Fear and grief and anger and something that might have been hope. Finally, he nodded and carefully lifted her to her feet. Maya swayed, her legs barely supporting her weight, but she stayed upright through sheer force of will. Together, they stumbled toward the cylinder. Maya's vision was graying at the edges, her body shutting down one system at a time, but her mind remained clear. Crystal clear, actually, like the dimensional exposure had burned away everything non-essential and left only pure focus. She could see the device's structure now, not just its physical components but its underlying purpose, its mathematical architecture. The knowledge wasn't her own. The entities were helping, feeding her information through the connection they'd established, guiding her hands. She reached the primary control panel and began working, her fingers flying across keyboards and switches with automatic precision. Chen stood beside her, supporting her weight when she threatened to collapse, reading out values from displays when her vision blurred too much to see. They worked together like they'd been doing this for years, like they were two halves of a whole, united by the legacy of their parents' choices. The device responded to Maya's commands, its configuration shifting, its purpose inverting. Where before it had been designed to tear open the threshold, to force a connection where none should exist, now it has become something else. A healing mechanism. A surgical tool for repairing the fabric of reality itself. The cylinder's hum changed pitch, dropping to a low, resonant tone that vibrated through the mountain's bones. It's working, Chen said, his voice thick with emotion. The readings are stabilizing. The threshold it's shrinking, not closing completely but narrowing to a stable size, like a window instead of a door. Good, Maya whispered. That's what we want. Permanent connection. Safe distance. Window, not weapon. Her hands were shaking badly now, blood vessels bursting under her skin, capillaries rupturing in her eyes. She looked like she'd been in a car accident, bruised and broken and barely holding together. But she kept working, kept inputting commands, kept making adjustments. The entities guided her through the process, their presence a steady warmth in her failing mind, their encouragement carrying her forward when her body wanted to quit. For minutes in, Maya's legs gave out completely. Chen caught her, lowered her carefully to the floor, but kept her hands on the control panel. She continued working from her knees, her movements growing slower and less precise but never stopping. Never giving up. Tell me something, she said to Chen, her voice barely audible over the device's hum. About your aunt. Something personal. Something that made her human. Chen was quiet for a moment, tears streaming down his face. She loved terrible music, like objectively bad. Boy bands and pop songs that made everyone groan. She'd blast it in the lab while she worked and sing along, completely off-key, and she didn't care who heard. She said that genius was wasted on people who took themselves too seriously. Maya laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough that brought up blood. My dad. He couldn't cook. At all. Burned everything. even cereal somehow. But every Sunday he'd try to make pancakes for breakfast. And they were always terrible. Always. But Mom and we'd eat them anyway and tell him they were delicious. Because it wasn't about the pancakes. It was about him trying. They were good people, Chen said softly. Flawed and scared and in over their heads. But good people trying to do the right thing. Yeah. And we're their kids. Finishing what they started. Making it right. Maya input the final sequence, watched as the device accepted it, felt the threshold's energy signature shift and stabilize. There. It's done. The scar is healed. The window is permanent but safe. Both sides can see through, share information but never touch. Never hurt each other. She collapsed fully then, her body finally giving out, her consciousness beginning to fragment. Chen caught her head before it hit the concrete, cradling her like she was something precious and fragile. Stay with me, he pleaded. Just a little longer. The medics are coming. We called for backup before everything went wrong. They're on their way. Won't help, Maya whispered. Not for this. But Chen, Richard, tell them. Tell everyone. We're not alone. The universe is full of others. Different but not dangerous. Scary but not evil. Just trying to understand. Just trying to exist. Like us. I will. Promise. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did. What you and your father and my aunt accomplished. Maya smiled, feeling her vision tunneling down to a pinpoint. Good. That's good. She paused, then added with the last of her strength. Hey, you know what's funny? I came up here to track a wounded doe. I just wanted to help an injured animal. And instead I saved 2 worlds. Dad would laugh at that. I would say I always overthink the simple stuff. Her eyes found the threshold, now a stable window of shimmering light. Through it, she could see the entities gathering, witnessing her final moments. They couldn't touch her physically, but she felt their presence anyway. Felt their gratitude and respect and sorrow. Felt them remembering her, recording her pattern, ensuring that some part of Maya Reyes would exist forever in the spaces between spaces. Thank you, came the thought, gentle and profound. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for being the bridge we needed. Thank you for talking to me, Maya thought back. Thank you for being patient with us. For giving us another chance. The last thing Maya Reyes saw before darkness took her was her father's face. Not as he'd been in the facility photos, young and hard and carrying the weight of command. And not as he'd been at the end, old and tired and worn down by years of secrets. But as he'd been in her favorite memory. Sitting in the shop on a lazy Sunday afternoon, teaching her how to rebuild her first carburetor. His hands patient and sure, his voice warm with pride. His eyes full of love and hope and the certainty that his daughter could fix anything if she just had the right tools and enough determination. That's my girl, he seemed to say. That's my Maida. I knew you could do it. And then there was light and peace, and the profound satisfaction of a job completed. A problem solved, a broken thing finally made whole. Maya Reyes died at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, 7 levels underground in a facility that officially didn't exist, saving a world that would never know her name. She was 33 years old. She left behind an auto repair shop, a truck parked on a mountain road, and a legacy that would bridge 2 realities for generations to come. Richard Chen held her body for a long time, crying for his team, for his aunt, for this brave, stubborn woman he'd barely known, but who'd reminded him why the work mattered. Why sacrifice wasn't weakness but the highest form of strength. Around him, the facility stabilized. The lights stopped flickering. The walls stopped rippling. The threshold settled into its new configuration. A permanent window between worlds, safe and stable and full of infinite possibility. And through that window the entities watched, bore witness, and began, for the first time in 60 years, to hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity was ready to take its place among the strange and wondrous multitude of consciousness that filled the universe. The age of isolation was over. The age of understanding had begun. And it had started with a mechanic who'd followed a trail of blood into the mountains and found something far more important than answers. She'd found redemption. For her father. For Dr. Chen. For everyone who'd ever made a mistake and wondered if it could be fixed. Maya had proved that it could. That it must. That with enough courage and enough stubbornness and enough willingness to listen instead of fight, even the impossible could be repaired. Her father would have been so proud. Richard Chen sat in the conference room of a building that had no official address. In a city that wasn't marked on any public map, giving testimony to people whose names he would never know. The walls were an institutional beige that seemed designed to drain all emotion from whatever happened within them. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the same steady frequency that had filled the facility's corridors. And Chen found himself irrationally hating that sound. Hating anything that reminded him of those terrible hours underground. It had been 3 weeks since Maya Reyes died in his arms. 3 weeks after Threshold Watch had pulled him out of the facility along with her body. Along with evidence and data and the disturbing reality that everything had changed. 3 weeks of debriefings and medical examinations and psychological evaluations designed to determine if he was reliable, if he was stable, if he could be trusted with the secret that would reshape human civilization. The panel before him consisted of 5 individuals, 2 military officers, 2 civilians who had the careful neutrality of intelligence operatives, and 1 woman who'd introduced herself simply as Dr. Sharma, consulting physicist. They'd been questioning him for 4 hours now, going over every detail of what had happened, every decision made, every word exchanged. Chen had told them everything. He'd promised Maya he would, had promised the entities, had promised himself. "Let's go over the timeline again," said the older of the 2 military officers, a general whose chest held enough ribbons to suggest he'd seen combat in at least 3 different wars. "You're telling us that Miss Reyes, a civilian with no security clearance, no scientific training, no official authorization, accessed a classified facility, made first contact with interdimensional entities, and unilaterally decided to open full communication." "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Chen replied, keeping his voice level. "Because that's what happened. And if she hadn't, we'd be dealing with a catastrophic breach right now instead of a stable threshold. She saved both worlds. She violated every protocol." One of the civilian operatives said, her tone flat and unreadable. "She compromised operational security. She exposed classified technology to unknown entities. By any measure, her actions were reckless at best, treasonous at worst." Chen felt anger flare in his chest, hot and bright and barely controllable. She was dying. She had maybe 10 minutes of consciousness left, and she used them to heal a wound your predecessors created when they decided to weaponize reality itself. Don't you dare sit there in your comfortable chair and judge someone who gave everything to fix a problem she didn't create. The room went silent. The general's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. "You were close to her? I knew her for less than an hour. But in that hour, she showed more courage and wisdom than I've seen in 20 years of service. She listened when everyone else, myself included, wanted to fight. She chose understanding over fear, and she died for it. So yes, I suppose I'm close to her. Close to what she represented. Close to what she proved was possible." Dr. Sharma leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "You mentioned in your initial report that the entities transferred knowledge to Miss Reyes during contact. That she was able to reconfigure the device because they were guiding her. Can you elaborate on that?" Chen nodded, grateful for a question that didn't feel like an accusation. It wasn't instruction in the traditional sense. More like intuitive understanding. Maya described it as seeing the device's purpose, its mathematical architecture. The entities were feeding her information through their connection, showing her what needed to be done. Without that guidance, she never could have completed the recalibration. The mathematics involved are beyond any human scientist's current understanding. But she understood them. She understood enough. She didn't need to comprehend every equation. She needed to know which switches to flip and in what order. She was a mechanic. Mechanics don't always understand the physics of combustion, but they know how to rebuild an engine. The entities gave her the mechanical knowledge to repair what was broken. Dr. Sharma made notes on a tablet, her stylus moving in quick, precise strokes. And the window, the stable threshold that remains. You've seen it, interacted with it. Describe what that's like. Chen closed his eyes, remembering. After Maya had died, after the device had stabilized, he'd stayed in the chamber for another hour, just watching, just trying to understand what she'd created. The threshold no longer looked like a wound or a tear. It had become something almost elegant. A circular aperture maybe 6 feet across, its edges defined by a faint shimmer of blue-white light. Through it you could see elsewhere. Not a place exactly, but a space where different rules applied. Where the entities existed as patterns of light and thought, visible but untouchable. It's like looking through a window into deep water, he said finally. You can see shapes moving in the depths, but you can't quite focus on them. They're aware of you watching. They watch back. There's no hostility in it. No threat. Just mutual observation. Curiosity. The beginning of something that might eventually become communication. Have they attempted to communicate since Miss Reyes's death? Yes. Not in words, but in patterns. Mathematical sequences displayed on the facility's monitors. Repetitions of prime numbers. Basic geometric shapes. They're trying to establish a common language. A framework for understanding. We've been responding with our own sequences. It's primitive, but it's working. Slowly, the second civilian operative spoke for the first time, his voice carefully modulated. And you believe they pose no threat? Chen met the man's eyes directly. I believe they pose exactly as much threat as we pose to them, which is to say, considerable but not through malice. We're incompatible. Contact is fatal to humans. But that doesn't make them enemies. It just makes them different. The real question isn't whether they're dangerous. The real question is whether we're wise enough to learn from our mistakes. What mistakes would those be? Assuming that anything we don't understand must be a weapon. Opening doors without considering who might be on the other side. Prioritizing military applications over peaceful exploration. Choose one. We've made them all. Chen paused, then added, my aunt knew better. Colonel Reyes knew better. They both tried to fix what Project Threshold broke, and they both died for it. Maya Reyes succeeded where they failed, and she died too. How many more people have to die before we accept that fear isn't strategy and violence isn't strength? The general exchanged glances with his colleagues. Some silent communication passed between them, some decision reached through looks alone. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Chen, you're being considered for a position. Director of Threshold Watch, replacing Director Morrison, who had to be relieved of duty after the incident. The job would involve overseeing all operations related to the facility, managing first contact protocols, and serving as primary liaison between the entities and human civilization. It's a position that requires absolute discretion, unquestionable loyalty, and the ability to make decisions that could affect billions of lives. Are you interested? Chen blinked, surprised despite himself. You want me to run the organization? We want someone who understands what's at stake. Someone who's seen the cost of getting this wrong. Someone who knew Sarah Chen and Miguel Reyes and Maya Reyes, and who carries their legacy forward. You're the logical choice. And if I say no, then we find someone else. But they won't have stood in that chamber. Won't have held a dying woman who sacrificed everything for a chance at peace. Won't have the moral authority that comes from witnessing what you've witnessed. We need that authority, Mr. Chen. The world will need it when this becomes public knowledge. When, not if. Dr. Sharma answered this time. The threshold can't be hidden indefinitely. Too many people saw the facility's activation. Too many systems registered the dimensional fluctuations. Within 6 months, maybe a year, the scientific community will have enough data to start asking questions we can't deflect. When that happens, we need someone at the helm who can tell the true story. Who can explain that we're not alone, that we've never been alone, and that's not something to fear. Chen thought about Maya, about her final words. Tell everyone. Tell them we're not alone. The universe is full of others. Different but not dangerous. He thought about his aunt's note. Not monsters. Just different. Wish we'd tried talking first. He thought about all the years Threshold Watch had operated in shadow, keeping secrets, treating first contact as a threat to be managed rather than an opportunity to be embraced. I'll take the job, he said. On one condition. Name it. Maya Reyes gets full credit. Her name goes in the official record. When the story comes out, when the world learns what happened, they learn about her. About what she did. About what she gave. No classified redactions. No anonymous sacrifice. She deserves to be remembered. The general smiled slightly. That was already decided. Miss Reyes will be listed as the primary architect of Stable Threshold Protocol. Her contribution will be documented, studied, and honored. We may make mistakes, Mr. Chen, but we're not monsters. We know a hero when we see one. Chen felt something loosen in his chest. Some tension he hadn't known he was carrying. Then I accept. Good. You start Monday. We'll have your office prepared and your security clearances updated. You'll have full access to all of Colonel Reyes's research, all of Dr. Chen's notes, and all current data from the Threshold. You'll also receive a team scientists, linguists, mathematicians, people who can help decode what the entities are trying to tell us. Your mission is simple. Learn to communicate. Establish protocols for safe interaction. And prepare humanity for the knowledge that the universe is far stranger and more populated than we ever imagined. Understood. One more thing, the general added, his expression growing serious. There are other sites. Not many, maybe a dozen worldwide. Places where the membrane between realities is thin. Places where other governments or private interests conducted similar research in the 60s and 70s. Most were shut down like Site 14. But we have indications that some might be becoming active again. The entities are trying to reach through in multiple locations, possibly trying to establish communication at every available access point. Chen's mind raced through implications. You think Maya's sacrifice at Site 14 somehow triggered a global response? We think her willingness to listen sent a signal. The entities now know that some humans are ready for contact. And they're trying to find others like her. Others who'll choose understanding over fear. Your job includes monitoring these other sites, reaching out to their equivalents of Threshold Watch, building an international framework for managing what's about to become the most significant event in human history. First contact. Exactly. And Mr. Chen, Richard, we're counting on you to make sure it goes better than the last time. The meeting ended shortly after. Chen was given a briefing packet, a secure phone, and directions to his new office in a building that still wouldn't appear on any map. As he left the conference room, Dr. Sharma caught up with him in the hallway. I knew Maya Reyes, she said quietly. Chen stopped, surprised. You did. Not well, but I grew up in Pinewood. Used to bring my car to Reyes Auto Repair when I was in high school. Maya was always there, always covered in grease, always patient when I asked stupid questions about engine maintenance. She once spent 2 hours teaching me how to change my own oil because she said I needed to understand my car, not just drive it. I moved away for college, got my PhD, joined the government. But I never forgot her. Never forget that mechanic who believed everyone should understand how things work. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. When I heard she was the one who made contact, who fixed the threshold, it made perfect sense. Of course it was Maya. Of course it was the woman who thought everything could be repaired if you were patient enough and stubborn enough. I'm glad her name will be remembered. She deserves that. Did you know about her father? Chen asked. About his connection to the facility? Dr. Sharma shook her head. Not until after. But thinking back, it explains some things. The way he'd sometimes stare at the mountains like they were keeping score. The nightmares my mother mentioned seeing him wake from when she'd stay late at the shop doing paperwork. He was carrying that burden for 40 years and nobody knew. Nobody helped him. Maya helped him. In the end. Yes, she finished what he started. That's what children do, isn't it? They carry forward their parents' unfinished business. They try to fix what their parents broke. Maya just had a bigger problem to solve than most. Dr. Sharma offered her hand. Good luck, Director Chen. Make it count. Make all of their sacrifices count. Chen shook her hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. I will. I promise. That night, Chen drove to Pinewood. It was a 5-hour trip from the unmarked building to the small mountain town, and he made it in silence, not even turning on the radio. He needed to think. I needed to process everything that had happened and everything that was coming. By the time he pulled into town, it was past midnight, and Pinewood was dark except for the streetlights and the neon sign of Murphy's Tavern. Reyes Auto Repair sat at the end of Main Street, a cinderblock building exactly as Maya had described it in her final moments. The lights were off, the bay doors closed, the parking lot empty except for a few cars that looked like they were waiting for repairs. Chen parked his rental car and sat there for a long moment, studying the building where Maya and her father had spent years fixing broken things, never knowing that they'd one day have to fix something far more important than engines. He got out of the car and approached the building. A sign hung on the front door, closed until further notice. Beneath it, someone had taped a handwritten note. Maya Reyes, beloved daughter, friend, and mechanic, passed away unexpectedly. The shop will remain closed while we determine its future. Thank you for your patronage over the years. The Reyes family. There was no Reyes family left. Chen knew. Maya had been an only child. Her mother had died 10 years ago, her father 3 years ago. Whatever extended family existed hadn't been involved in the shop. This notice was probably written by a lawyer or executor, someone trying to be respectful while wrapping up the affairs of a dead woman. But the shop shouldn't close. Not now. Not when it represented something important. A legacy of fixing things, of making broken pieces whole. Chen pulled out his new secure phone and made a call to a number he'd been given. This is Chen, he said when someone answered. I need to establish a foundation. Private funding for maintaining a historical site in Pinewood, Colorado. Reyes Auto Repair. I want it preserved exactly as it was, turned into a museum or memorial. Whatever it takes. Money isn't an issue, use the discretionary budget. Just make it happen. He listened to confirmation, then added, and find any local mechanics who worked with Maya Reyes. Offer them grants, scholarships, support for their businesses. Maya believed everyone should understand how things work. Let's honor that. Let's make sure her philosophy survives even if she didn't. When he hung up, Chen felt slightly better. It wasn't enough, nothing would ever be enough, but it was something. A way to keep Maya's memory alive in the town she'd loved, among the people she'd served. He was about to leave when he noticed something in the shop's window. A photograph, taped to the glass, catching the streetlight. Chen moved closer and saw Miguel and Elena Reyes on their wedding day. The same photo that had been in the vault, young and happy and full of hope. And next to it, a more recent photo. Maya in her shop, grease-stained and grinning, holding a wrench like a scepter, standing in front of an old truck she'd presumably just fixed. Someone had written below the photos in neat script, "They fixed things. All kinds of things. We'll miss them." Chen stood there in the midnight darkness of a nowhere town, looking at the faces of 3 people who'd given everything to repair a mistake they didn't make, and he made a promise. Not just to them, but to himself and to the entities waiting on the other side of the threshold. This wouldn't be forgotten. This wouldn't be buried in classified files and redacted reports. When the time came, when humanity learned about the threshold and the entities and the strange new universe that had opened before them, they would know these names. Miguel Reyes, Sarah Chen, Maya Reyes, the people who'd proven that fear could be overcome, that mistakes could be corrected, that even the impossible could be fixed with enough courage and stubbornness and heart. The age of understanding had begun with their sacrifices, and Richard Chen would make damn sure their sacrifices meant something. 6 months later, the news broke. It started with a paper published in Nature by a team of physicists at CERN who detected inexplicable fluctuations in quantum field measurements. Then an astronomer in Chile reported anomalous readings from a radio telescope pointed at empty space. Then a graduate student in Tokyo published a thesis about thin zones, where dimensional membranes showed signs of instability. Within weeks, the scientific community was buzzing with speculation about parallel dimensions, alternate realities, and the possibility of contact with non-human intelligence. The government tried to contain it, issued denials, dismissed the findings as measurement errors or misinterpreted data. But the truth was too big to hide. Too many scientists had too much evidence. And when a whistleblower leaked documents about Project Threshold, carefully sanitized documents that Chen had prepared for exactly this moment, the dam broke completely. The world learned that humanity wasn't alone. That we'd opened a door in 1962. That we'd made terrible mistakes. And that a mechanic from Colorado had fixed those mistakes at the cost of her own life. The reaction was complicated. Panic from some quarters. Excitement from others. Religious leaders debated the theological implications. Scientists demanded access to the data. Politicians argued about what it meant for national security. And everywhere, people asked the same question: what happens now? Chen appeared on a carefully selected news program to provide answers. He'd spent weeks preparing, rehearsing, making sure he could explain the incomprehensible in terms regular people could understand. The interview was watched by an estimated 2.3 billion people worldwide. The entities aren't invaders, he explained to the skeptical host. They're neighbors we couldn't perceive before. The threshold is a window between our worlds. We can see each other, communicate, but not visit. Our environments are mutually toxic. So we're learning to share knowledge across that divide. And they want to share knowledge? The host asked. What could they possibly gain from us? Perspective, understanding, art and music and emotion, things that exist in our reality but not in theirs. They're beings of pure mathematics and thought. We're beings of biology and sensation. Neither is superior. We're just different. And the universe is large enough for both to exist. Large enough for us to learn from each other. Some people are calling Maya Reyes a hero. Others are calling her reckless. What do you say? Chen had prepared for this question, had thought about it during countless sleepless nights. I say she was human, flawed and scared and thrown into an impossible situation. But when faced with a choice between fear and understanding, between violence and communication, she chose the harder path. She chose to listen. And that choice, that simple, terrifying decision to extend a hand instead of a fist, that's what saved us all. If that's not heroism, I don't know what is. The interview ended with Chen showing footage from the threshold, carefully edited to be viewable without causing psychological distress, of the entities displaying patterns of light and movement that had been decoded as greetings, messages of peace, offers of knowledge about mathematics and physics and concepts that had no names in human languages. The world watched, the world wondered, and slowly, gradually, the fear began to give way to curiosity. A year after Maya's death, Chen stood in Pinewood at the dedication ceremony for the Reyes Memorial Museum. The auto repair shop had been preserved exactly as Maya had left it, with her tools still hanging on pegboards, her workbench still covered in the organized chaos of an active workspace, her coffee mug still sitting next to the register. But now there was also an addition, a modern wing that housed exhibits about Project Threshold, about the science of dimensional theory, and about the people who'd bridged two worlds. The crowd was larger than Chen had expected. Scientists and journalists, yes, but also regular people from Pinewood and beyond. People who'd known Maya. People who'd heard her story and felt inspired by it. People who wanted to understand how a small-town mechanic had become the most important person in human history. Chen stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled faces, and began his prepared remarks. Maya Reyes fixed cars for a living. She changed oil and replaced brake pads and occasionally welded exhaust systems. These weren't glamorous skills. They didn't require advanced degrees or classified clearances. But they required something else: the patience to understand how broken things work, the stubbornness to keep trying when repairs seemed impossible, and the fundamental belief that nothing is too damaged to be fixed if you have the right tools and enough determination. When Maya found the threshold, she could have run, could have called the authorities and let someone else deal with the problem. Instead, she stayed. She listened. She learned. And when she understood what needed to be done, she did it, knowing it would cost her everything. Because that's what people do when they have the skills to fix something important. They fix it, regardless of the cost. Her father, Miguel Reyes, carried the burden of Project Threshold for 40 years. He thought he was protecting the world by keeping it secret, by bearing that weight alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, if he'd shared the burden sooner, we could have solved this problem without requiring his daughter's sacrifice. We'll never know. But what we do know is that he raised Maya to be someone who could finish what he started. Someone strong enough and smart enough and stubborn enough to look at an impossible problem and refuse to accept that it couldn't be solved. Dr. Sarah Chen, my aunt, made the same choice Maya did. She stayed at the controls while others evacuated. She gave her life to seal the breach, buying humanity 60 years to learn and grow and prepare for the moment when the threshold would open again. Her final message: not monsters, just different. Wish we tried talking first, became the foundation of everything that followed. She understood, even in her last moments, that fear was our real enemy. Not the entities, not the unknown, just our own fear of things we don't understand. Today we honor all three of them. We commit ourselves to the principle they died proving, that understanding is always better than fear. The threshold is open, and humanity's response will define what kind of species we become. Maya would tell us to stop overthinking it. She'd say the entities are just another problem to solve. And she'd be right. We can do this. We must do this. For Maya, for Miguel, for Sarah, for everyone who comes after us and who'll inherit the world we're building right now, in these crucial early years of contact. Thank you for coming. Thank you for remembering. And thank you for being part of the future they fought to give us. The applause was subdued but genuine. This wasn't a moment for celebration. Too much had been lost. Too many questions remained unanswered. But it was a moment for commitment, for dedication, for promising that their sacrifices wouldn't be wasted. After the ceremony, Chen stood in Maya's workshop, running his hand over her tools, trying to imagine her here, trying to understand the woman who'd become the bridge between worlds. An elderly man approached, one of the locals, weathered and white-haired, with eyes that had seen too many Colorado winters. You knew her? The man asked. Briefly. Not nearly long enough. She fixed my truck once. Transmission was shot, and I didn't have the money for a replacement. She rebuilt the whole thing by hand, charged me half what any other shop would have asked. When I tried to pay more, she refused. Said she didn't do it for the money. Did it because she couldn't stand seeing broken things stay broken. He smiled slightly. Guess she took that philosophy to its logical extreme. Huh. Yeah, she did. You're the one running things now. The threshold watch or whatever it's called. That's right. The old man studied Chen for a long moment. Do right by her. By all of them. Don't let this become another government program full of bureaucrats and bean counters who forget why any of this matters. Keep it human. Keep it about fixing things, not about controlling them. That's what Maya would want. That's exactly what I intend to do. The old man nodded, satisfied, and walked away to examine the exhibits. Chen stood alone in the workshop, surrounded by Maya's tools and her father's legacy, and the weight of a future that seemed both terrifying and full of possibility. His phone buzzed. A message from the facility. New communication patterns detected. Entities requesting expanded dialogue. Mathematical sequences suggest concepts related to art and music. Recommend deploying a specialist team for interpretation. Chen smiled despite himself. The entities were curious about human creativity, about the parts of existence that couldn't be reduced to equations and logic. Of course they were, because understanding wasn't just about sharing facts. It was about sharing what made each species unique, what made consciousness worth having regardless of what form it took. He typed a reply, approved. Deploy the team, and let's send them some music files. Start with something Maya would have liked. Something human. Something that reminds them we're more than just the species that accidentally tore open their reality. We're the species that learned to fix what we broke. As Chen left the museum and headed back to his car, He looked up at the mountains rising against the October sky. Somewhere up there, buried 7 levels deep in solid rock, a threshold remained open. A window between worlds. A permanent reminder that humanity's isolation had ended not with conquest or invasion, but with conversation. With a mechanic who'd followed a wounded doe into the high country and found something far more important than she'd been looking for. With a woman who'd proven that even the impossible could be fixed if you had the right tools, enough patience, and the courage to try. The mountains kept their secrets still. But some secrets, once revealed, changed everything. And Maya Reyes had changed everything. The world would never be the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what it needed. 5 years later, the Threshold Research Institute occupied a converted warehouse in Boulder, Colorado, close enough to Site 14 for practical purposes, but far enough from Pinewood that its presence didn't overwhelm the small town's identity. The building housed the world's foremost experts in interdimensional communication, quantum linguistics, and what one Reyes scientist had dubbed xenomathematical poetry, the art of translating pure mathematical thought into concepts humans could comprehend and vice versa. Dr. Sarah Nakamura stood in the Institute's main observation room, watching the live feed from Site 14's threshold chamber. The window between worlds had become clearer over the years, more refined, as both humans and entities learned to optimize the connection. What had once looked like a rippling tear in space now resembled a high-definition screen, though screen was an inadequate term for something that existed in more dimensions than human senses could directly perceive. On the other side, an entity that the research team had designated Harmony 7 was displaying a pattern that took Sarah's breath away every time she saw it. The entity had been working with human musicians and mathematicians for 6 months, learning about music theory and emotional resonance and the strange human need to express feelings through organized sound. Now it was showing them what music looked like when translated into its native language, pure mathematics given aesthetic form. The pattern was beautiful. Fractal recursions that echoed Beethoven's Fifth Symphony but transformed it into something new, something that existed in the space between human emotion and mathematical perfection. Sarah watched as the entity's form pulsed and flowed, each movement a note, each color shift a chord progression, each geometric transformation a crescendo. "They're getting better at this," said Marcus Rodriguez, the Institute's director of xenomusicology. He stood beside Sarah, his tablet recording every nuance of the entity's display. 6 months ago, Harmony 7 couldn't distinguish between major and minor keys. Now they're composing original pieces that incorporate human emotional frameworks into their mathematical structures. It's incredible. Has anyone told Richard yet? He's watching from his office, probably crying. He always cries when they do something particularly beautiful. Sarah smiled. Richard Chen had been director of Threshold Watch for 5 years now, and in that time, he transformed the organization from a secretive government program into an international cooperative that included representatives from 47 countries. The Threshold had become humanity's most important research focus, more significant than space exploration or quantum computing or any of the other frontier sciences. Because the entities weren't just academic curiosities, they were proof that consciousness could exist in forms humans had never imagined, and they had knowledge of physics and mathematics that made Earth's greatest scientists look like students. But more than that, they were proof that difference didn't equal danger, that the unknown could be approached with curiosity instead of fear, that communication was always possible if both sides were willing to try. "How's the memorial coming along?" Marcus asked, still watching Harmony 7's performance. "Almost finished. We're planning the dedication for next month. October 8th. 5 years to the day. You think people will come? It's been half a decade. The initial media frenzy has died down. Most people have moved on. The people who matter will come," Sarah said quietly. "The ones who remember what was sacrificed. The ones who understand that we're only here, only doing this because Maya Reyes chose to listen instead of run." She didn't add that she'd be there regardless of who else showed up. Sarah Nakamura had joined the Institute 3 years ago, leaving a comfortable position at MIT because she'd felt compelled to contribute to the work Maya had died enabling. Sarah had never met Maya, had never been to Pinewood, had no personal connection to the threshold story beyond being human. But that had been enough. When you learned that someone your own age had sacrificed everything to bridge two worlds, you either stepped up to honor that sacrifice or you spent the rest of your life wondering what you might have contributed if you'd been brave enough to try. The observation room door opened, and Richard Chen entered. He looked older than his 52 years, his hair fully gray now, his face lined with the weight of a job that never got easier. But his eyes were bright as he watched Harmony 7 complete their mathematical symphony, and Sarah saw the tears Marcus had predicted. "Beautiful," Chen whispered. "Every time they do this, every time they show us what's possible when two different forms of consciousness meet each other halfway, it reminds me why any of this matters." "Hard day?" Sarah asked. "Congressional hearing. Senator Bradley is pushing for tighter restrictions on threshold access. Says we're moving too fast, taking too many risks, exposing humanity to dangers we don't fully understand. He wants a moratorium on all entity communication until we can guarantee safety." Marcus snorted. "Guarantee safety? Like we could ever guarantee safety from anything. Does he want a guarantee against car accidents too? Against natural disasters? Against any of the million other ways the universe can kill us?" "He's afraid," Chen said simply. "And when people are afraid, they want control. They want certainty. They want someone to promise that nothing bad will ever happen. It's understandable, even if it's impossible to deliver." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth. That the entities could have forced their way through at any point in the last 60 years if invasion was their goal. That they've been nothing but patient and cooperative since we established stable communication. That they've shared knowledge that's advanced human science by decades. The cancer research alone has saved an estimated 50,000 lives in the past 3 years. And I told him that Maya Reyes didn't die so we could slam the door shut the moment things got uncomfortable. She died so we could learn, so we could grow, so we could prove that humanity was ready to be part of something larger than ourselves." "How'd he take it?" Chen smiled slightly. "About as well as expected. But the other committee members seemed receptive. And public opinion is on our side. 73% approval rating for continued threshold research in the latest polls. People are scared, yes. But they're also curious. They're also hopeful. And hope, it turns out, is stronger than fear. Eventually." Harmony 7's display concluded with a final flourish, a geometric pattern that perfectly captured the feeling of a symphony's triumphant ending. Then the entity held still, waiting for human response. This was part of the communication protocol. After sharing something, you waited, gave the other side time to process, to formulate their own contribution to the dialogue. Marcus pulled up a prepared file on his tablet and initiated the transfer. On screens within the threshold chamber, a recording began to play. A human orchestra performing Dvorak's New World Symphony, selected because the entities had expressed interest in music that dealt with themes of discovery and adaptation. The sound wouldn't carry through the threshold, physics prevented that, but the visual of humans playing instruments, the mathematical patterns of the musical notation, the way the conductor's movements translated intention into organized sound, all of that could be displayed and observed. Harmony 7 watched with what Sarah had learned to recognize as rapt attention. The entity's form shifted colors subtly, sampling different frequencies as if trying to perceive the sound through its absence. After a moment, other entities gathered around the threshold on their side, drawn by curiosity or by Harmony 7's evident enthusiasm. Dozens of them, hundreds, all watching humanity's artistic expression. The entities watched the symphony with what could only be called wonder. When it ended, Harmony 7 created something unprecedented. A mathematical pattern that incorporated both human musical notation and their own geometric language. A true hybrid. The first genuine co-creation between species. Richard Chen stood transfixed. This was what Maya had died for. Not just peaceful coexistence, but genuine collaboration. The building of something neither species could have imagined alone. "She'd love this," he whispered. The memorial dedication drew thousands. Scientists and diplomats, yes, but but also ordinary people from Pinewood and beyond. They gathered around a bronze statue erected at the mountain trailhead where Maya had parked her truck 5 years ago. Maya with a wrench in one hand, the other extended forward, palm open. Not reaching for something, but offering. Inviting. The inscription read simply, "She chose to listen." Chen gave the keynote address, but kept it brief. Maya hadn't been one for long speeches. Instead, he told a story. When I asked Maya what she was doing, why she'd risk everything, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "My dad taught me that everything can be fixed if you have the right tools and enough patience." Then she smiled and added, "Turns out the right tool was just being willing to listen." That evening, as the crowd dispersed and sunset painted the mountains gold, Chen climbed to the facility entrance. The blast door stood open now, welcoming rather than forbidding. Inside, the threshold pulsed with steady light. The entities had prepared something special. As Chen entered the chamber, every screen activated, displaying a message they'd spent months crafting. Translated carefully, painfully, into human language. "Thank you, Maya Reyes. Thank you for seeing us not as threat, but as kin. You taught us that courage wears many faces, that the bravest act is not fighting, but understanding. Your pattern remains with us, not as memory, but as foundation. Every bridge we build between our peoples rests on the one you became. Rest well, daughter of Earth. Your work continues." Chen read it twice, tears streaming freely. Then he placed his hand against the threshold's edge, close enough to feel its warmth, careful not to touch. On the other side, Harmony 7 and countless others pressed close to their edge of the divide. Watching, remembering, grateful. The age of understanding had begun with a mechanic who'd followed her instincts into the mountains and found her purpose. It would continue with scientists and diplomats, artists and mathematicians, all walking the path she'd opened. But it would always belong to her, Maya Reyes, who'd proven that the impossible could be fixed, that different need not mean dangerous, and that sometimes the greatest repair required not tools, but trust. Her father would have been so proud. The universe was larger now, stranger, full of possibilities humanity was only beginning to comprehend. And somewhere in the spaces between spaces, in the mathematics that underpinned reality itself, a mechanic's daughter smiled and got back to work. There were always more things to fix. Thank you for staying with Maya's story until the end. If this tale moved you or made you think differently about what's possible, please like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Maya's position? I'd love to hear from you. There are always more bridges to build, always more worlds to understand.